So if you ever find yourself walking through a traditional market in Southeast Asia, um, say somewhere deep in the Indonesian archipelago.
Or maybe like a rural village in Myanmar.
Yeah, exactly. You might lock eyes with a grandmother offering you this warm, welcoming smile. But to an outsider, or, especially to a kid seeing it for the first time, that smile can look genuinely terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. It's a striking visual.
I mean, her teeth, her gums, her lips, they are stained this bright, visceral, shocking red. It honestly looks like she just took a bite out of a raw animal.
It really does. It has a very horror-esque look to it if you don't know what you're looking at.
Right, but hidden inside that mouth, like within the crushed green leaves and the rough nuts she's chewing, might just be one of the oldest, most profound theological prophecies in human history.
Which is wild. It forces you to completely reevaluate where human beings store their most sacred knowledge. Because when you try to picture the preservation of ancient, world-altering theological secrets, your mind naturally drifts toward, locked, climate-controlled vaults deep beneath the Vatican.
Or maybe those fragile, dust-covered parchment scrolls hidden away in a Middle Eastern cave.
Right. You expect a guarded, highly exclusive institutional kind of history.
And instead, the sources you and I are diving into today present a premise that completely shatters that expectation.
Completely shatters it, yeah.
So for today's deep dive, we are exploring this massive theological secret that is hiding in plain sight. We're looking at how these seemingly ordinary traditions of chewing betel nut across Asia and the ancient Javanese and Chinese scripts we thought we already understood might be hiding the ultimate code regarding human salvation.
What's fascinating here is the methodology our sources use to decode this. They're applying a phenomenological approach.
Okay, unpack that a little for us.
So rather than looking at history purely through the lens of dates, battles, and kings, phenomenology asks you to look at the physical, subjective experience of a ritual. It treats daily habits and physical traditions as living texts.
Okay, to put that into perspective for you, the listener, think about why people shake hands. Today, it's just a business greeting, right?
Yeah, just a normal, everyday thing.
But phenomenologically, that physical action is a living text preserving an ancient reality. It was originally about showing a stranger you didn't have a weapon in your hand.
Exactly. The original conscious reason faded away, but the physical ritual survived as this subconscious memory of seeking peace.
And the sources argue that these massive Asian traditions are operating the exact same way, just on a deeply theological level.
Right.
And the entry point for this entire analysis is a piece of contemporary literature. It's this wonderfully eccentric poem titled Sekapursiri Pinang.
It acts as the conceptual bridge here. The poet takes this incredibly common, somewhat messy street-level habit and just elevates it by layering it with heavy Abrahamic theology.
It is brilliant. I'm actually going to recite the entire poem for you right now, including the original Indonesian text, because you really need to hear the cadence, the rhythm, and just the sheer audacity of what this author is proposing.
It's quite a ride, so yeah, go for it.
Okay, here is Sekapursiri Pinang. I'll break it up a bit so we can take it in. It starts. Halay daun di tanganmu, bawa, ku ingat legenda bersiut Adam, Hawa, memetik dedaunan dijadikan mereka penutup aurat.
Bringing in Adam and Eve right out of the gate.
Right,
Yeah.
then it goes. Damamun Allah pun lalu gantikan kultiha dikena mereka pakaian dan di atas daun obat itu kau usir ke puksi warna tulang.
The lime-colored like bone. Such a vivid image.
It really is. Then adalah tulang lambang, temurun amanat, putih kisahkanlah perudang abadikan cinta sekalipun setelah wafat ialah hal yang tak boleh pernah hilang.
The white mandate, passing down the memory.
Yeah, and then this part. Kau bubukan pula pinang menjadi darah kisrahang berbagi kita lambang saudara sesungguhnya kita merah mengenang.
Becoming blood pulverized by the jaw. That's the visceral part right there.
Exactly. And it continues. Fikor hewan mati, ganti Adam lambang tebus kutuk buah, et ha-daat to abal bersilam, ingatan pun tenggelam hanya ritual, maknanya terlupakan.
The ritual remains, but the meaning is forgotten. That's the core thesis.
And the poem brings it home here. Ritual penebusan akan tetap tersendi sampai terima yang tersalib di Calvary, kambing jantan di atas altar yang saya jibah terkura terawai.
Tying it to the Chinese characters there. We'll definitely get into that.
Oh, we absolutely will. And demi persatu jadilah benar, perlambang ketentuan Allah sekapursiri pinang perlambang kau tambah gambir cemke tambah kau.
Adding the extra spices.
Yeah, finishing up with. Ku terima hangat dengan syukur dan senang susah sengketapan serasa lampau yang Tuhan beri telah ku terima sutila menerima hantaran hamba sekapursiri pinang surgawi, yaitu Yesus hosti Calvary.
Wow. I mean, there is a tremendous amount to unpack in that.
Okay, let's unpack this. The imagery alone is striking. The author is taking that visceral, horror-esque visual of the red-stained mouth that scares all the little kids and entirely flipping the narrative.
Yeah, it's no longer just a mild stimulant or an old cultural quirk. It's framed as a profoundly sacred act of botanical chemistry.
Botanical chemistry. That is an incredibly accurate way to describe the mechanics of the tradition.
To understand the depth of the poem, you really have to understand the physical reality of chewing Sirikapur Pinan. You are taking 3 highly specific, distinct ingredients.
Right. Walk us through those.
First, the siri, which is the green betel leaf. Second, the kapur, which is slaked lime. It's a stark white powder that the poem very deliberately compares to human bone.
Which is just a wild comparison, but it makes so much sense visually.
Exactly. And finally, the pinang, the hard brown areca nut.
So you hold these raw, earthy materials in your hand, and they're completely inert. They're just a leaf, a nut, and some mineral powder.
Right, doing nothing on their own.
But the moment you put them in your mouth and begin to crush them with your teeth, the poem uses the phrase digisarahang, meaning pulverized by the jaw. You trigger this insane chemical reaction.
It's fascinating. The saliva mixes with the alkaline slaked lime, which breaks down the alkaloids in the areca nut, and the entire mixture undergoes this stunning transformation.
It turns into a thick, bright red liquid that looks completely indistinguishable from human blood.
You are witnessing a localized form of transubstantiation. The mundane elements are destroyed and recreated into a symbol of life force.
It's like a botanical alchemy that creates a blood oath without anyone actually having to bleed.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And you really cannot overstate how vast this practice is. This isn't an isolated habit found only in one remote village.
Right, it's not just an Indonesian thing.
Not at all. This specific combination of leaf, lime, and nut is a massive unifying cultural pillar spread across the entirety of Nusantara, the Indonesian archipelago, but it stretches way beyond that.
You find this exact same practice deeply embedded in the histories of Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, parts of India, Taiwan, and even stretching all the way down into Papua New Guinea.
You are looking at a pan-Asian phenomenon practiced by hundreds of millions of people, crossing massive geographic, linguistic, and national borders.
So if you're listening from one of those countries, this is your history too. It makes the hidden theological code a regional phenomenon, not just a local one.
Exactly. Which means if there is a subconscious code hidden in the physical act of chewing these ingredients, it represents a shared theological language for a massive percentage of the human population. It is a regional connective tissue.
And the connective tissue, according to the poem, centers almost entirely around the resulting color. There is a specific phrase the author uses that I want to zoom in on.
Sesungguhnya kita merah. Truly, we are red.
Yes, that phrase carries immense depth.
It forces you to ask why a culture would purposefully stain their mouths, a highly visible part of the body, with this specific color. I mean, it goes far beyond just a side effect of the chemistry, right?
Oh, absolutely. The emphasis on red is where the physical ritual crashes head-on into deep psychological and theological symbolism. Red is arguably the most loaded color in human history. Tell me about it.
Well, look at Chinese culture. It is the ultimate symbol of happiness, vitality, and good fortune, which is why it dominates their celebrations and architecture.
Red envelopes, red lanterns, yeah.
Right. But you look over at the ancient Jewish tradition, and red carries a much heavier, more solemn weight. It represents the blood of the atonement sacrifice.
Like the Passover lamb.
Exactly. It is the life given to cover sin, painted on the doorpost during Passover to ward off death.
And taking it even broader, across almost every human society, red is the universal marker of the life force. I mean, it is the biological reality of vitality. The blood pumping through you right now is red because of the iron oxidizing in your hemoglobin.
Right. So when two people in an ancient Asian village sit down to resolve a dispute, and they share this betel nut mixture, they are essentially performing a blood oath.
They chew the elements, produce this red symbol of life, and share it to break down hostility.
They are visually and physically enacting a covenant of peace. But the poet isn't satisfied just leaving it as a general symbol of peace. They draw a hard, direct line back to the very beginning of the Abrahamic narrative.
Yeah, transitioning from the physical act of chewing to the biblical Garden of Eden. This is where the poem drops a massive anvil of Hebrew theology right into the middle of a Nusantara cultural practice.
It really does come out of nowhere if you aren't expecting it.
The verse casually drops the Hebrew phrase, Etz ha-daat tov vara.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The forbidden tree.
So how does this author make a connection between grandmothers in Myanmar chewing leaves and the fall of Adam and Eve? It seems like quite a leap.
Well, you have to analyze the sequence of events immediately following the fall of the Genesis narrative. When Adam and Eve consume the fruit, their eyes are open to their own nakedness.
They experience shame for the first time.
Right. And their immediate instinctive reaction is to try and cover that shame using their own efforts. They pluck fig leaves and sew them together into makeshift garments.
Which perfectly mirrors the first step of the betel nut ritual. The green leaf held in the hand. It represents human effort.
Exactly. But the biblical text makes a profound theological statement next. It dictates that human effort, those green leaves, is fundamentally insufficient to cover the gravity of sin and shame.
So the divine steps in.
Yes, God replaces those leafy garments with garments made of animal skins.
Which means, logically, an innocent animal had to die. Blood had to be spilled.
That moment introduces the foundational mechanic of substitutionary atonement. It's a complex theological term, but the underlying mechanism is based on cosmic justice.
Okay, break that down for us.
The ancient mind understood that a transgression creates a debt, an imbalance in the universe. To restore the balance, to cover the sin, a life must be given. The leaves were inadequate. They had to be replaced by the shedding of innocent blood.
A substitute took the penalty meant for the transgressor, the first animal sacrifice.
Precisely. So the analysis in our sources is arguing that this specific transition, the move from insufficient green leaves to the necessary shedding of red blood for a covering, was such a psychically shattering event for early humanity that it became hardwired into our collective subconscious.
The author views the betel nut ritual as humanity subconsciously continuing to act out this trauma and this memory.
Yes. In oral cultures, memory operates differently than in literate ones.
Oh.
A society without a formalized written text cannot rely on a book to preserve their deepest historical truths.
Because spoken words drift, languages evolve, and verbal stories become mythologized over centuries.
Exactly. But a multi-sensory physical ritual, that is a highly stable preservation technology.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You might forget the names of the ancient kings, but you don't forget the exact ratio of lime to leaf, or the specific way you grind the nut.
Because your grandmother taught your mother, and your mother taught you. The body remembers the action even if the conscious mind forgets the original historical context.
The physical act becomes a time capsule.
The source argues that as early humans dispersed across the globe, the conscious narrative details of the Eden sacrifice faded, but the physical compulsion remained.
The need to take a green leaf, mix it with earthly elements, and crush it until it produces the color of sacrificial blood as a symbol of peace. That physical language survived completely intact across Asia. I see the structural logic there, I really do. But I have to push back slightly and play the skeptic for a moment.
Sure, go ahead.
It is incredibly tempting to see patterns where none exist. Couldn't this just be parallel evolution? You know, you have a plant that acts as a mild stimulant, people realize it turns their saliva red, and over thousands of years, they attach cultural significance to it.
That's a very fair point.
I mean, is there a real argumentative basis for this, or is it just a poet connecting random dots?
This skepticism is crucial, and it's the exact question a rigorous anthropologist would ask. If the betel nut ritual were the only piece of evidence, you could easily dismiss it as parallel evolution or a poetic projection.
Right, it would just be a neat coincidence.
However, the source material doesn't stop at oral tradition. To prove that this isn't just a reverse-engineered metaphor, the analysis completely shifts geography and medium.
This was the part that really got me. To move the narrative forward, we have to ask why a poem about Nusantara traditions suddenly brings up Chinese calligraphy.
Because the source material points to a monumental discovery. Ancient Chinese script functions as a visual Bible.
Which is just a massive claim. Because if a physical ritual is how an oral culture builds a time capsule, you have to ask how a literate culture achieves the same thing.
The preservation mechanism shifts from physical action to visual engineering. The Chinese script is fundamentally different from a phonetic alphabet like English, where letters just represent sounds.
Right. Traditional Chinese characters are logograms. They're conceptual building blocks.
Exactly. You take smaller symbols, called radicals, and you architect them together to build a complex abstract idea. And the sources zero in on one specific character to prove their point.
The character for righteousness, truth, or justice. The character is Yi.
When you deconstruct how Yi is engineered, stroke by stroke, the implications are staggering.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break it down for you. The character is composed of two distinct parts stacked vertically. The top radical is yang, which translates to a lamb or a sheep.
Specifically, an unblemished animal used for sacrifice in ancient times.
And underneath the lamb, forming the foundation of the character, is the radical wo,
which means me or I, the self.
So think about the sheer philosophical mechanics of this. Thousands of years ago, ancient Chinese philosophers sat down and had to decide how to visually represent the abstract concept of being entirely righteous, of being in a state of absolute restored truth.
And how do they draw it?
They literally engineered the concept of righteousness by drawing the self, I, placing itself directly underneath the sacrificial lamb.
I under the lamb. It is a structural schematic of substitutionary atonement.
It flawlessly mirrors the Abrahamic theology. You cannot attain righteousness through your own green leaves, your own effort. You only achieve righteousness when you are covered by the blood of the sacrificial lamb.
The architecture of the Chinese character perfectly matches the theology of the Betel Nut ritual. What gives this immense historical weight is the timeline.
Yeah, let's talk about the timeline, because people might just assume a missionary showed up and changed the language.
We are not looking at modern Chinese here.
Yeah.
The roots of this character trace back to the oracle bone scripts from the Shang dynasty.
Wow.
We are looking at an era that predates the formalized compilation of the Torah by Moses in the Middle East by centuries, if not millennia.
So to be absolutely clear, this is not a result of some 19th century missionary traveling to China, handing them a Bible, and the locals deciding to tweak their alphabet to match the new religion.
The timeline makes that completely impossible. The Chinese characters contain this deeply sophisticated theology of a required sacrifice long before the texts of the Old Testament were even formalized.
It implies that the Chinese script contains both history and a prophecy of salvation that existed long before the texts of the Middle East were locked in. I love how the source frames this. It's like the ancient Chinese language is a zip file of theology.
A zip file, I like that.
They took this massive theological prophecy and locked it into the very structure of their daily writing. Every time a scholar wrote the word for righteousness, they were unknowingly sketching a prophecy of a lamb covering human sin. It was just waiting for millennia to be extracted.
It really reinforces the argument that the message of salvation was never localized or monopolized by one specific tribe in the Middle Eastern desert. It was a universal human inheritance.
Preserved in different mediums based on the culture, China used structural calligraphy.
Right.
And that realization creates a perfect logical bridge right back to Southeast Asia. Because the message of salvation isn't strictly monopolized by the Chinese script either, Nusantara holds its own massive secret.
We shift from the conceptual logograms of China to the phonetic syllabary of Java.
If you grew up anywhere near Java, Indonesia, you were likely required to memorize the traditional Javanese script in school. It is deeply ingrained in the cultural education, and it's known as the ha-daat.
Yes, the foundational literacy tool of the island.
I'm going to recite it for you in full. It goes, ha-naka-raka-ta-ta-ta-sawala-pata-jaya-nya-maga-pata-na.
It functions as an alphabet, organizing the phonetic sounds of the language, but uniquely, it also forms a complete, coherent narrative sentence.
Yeah, and every child learns this standard, commonly taught translation, which is tied to a famous local myth about a king named Ajisaka. The surface-level translation goes like this. Hanaka-raka-raka, there were two messengers.
While they had a dispute, they argued, they fought.
Pa-jaya-nya, they were equally powerful and matched in combat.
And then Magapatakanya, unable to defeat each other, they both died and became corpses.
So on the surface, it serves as this tragic, moralistic folktale about the dangers of stubbornness leading to mutual destruction.
But the researchers in our sources noticed a glaring linguistic anomaly hidden right at the very end of that standard translation. The entire mystery revolves around that final line. Magabatanga.
And specifically, the word maga.
Right. When you attempt to apply rigorous linguistic analysis to the word maga within modern or even classical Javanese dictionaries, you hit a total dead end.
It is a linguistic mystery. It's incredibly difficult to find in standard dictionaries. For generations, because scholars couldn't definitively trace its origin, they effectively just brushed it off.
The prevailing academic excuse was that maga was merely a poetic filler word.
Right. They assumed the creator of the alphabet just needed a couple of syllables to make the rhyme scheme work, or they vaguely tied it to the word for corpse.
Which is intellectually hollow, honestly, suggesting that the foundational literacy tool for an entire civilization ends on a meaningless filler word. Alphabets of this cultural magnitude are engineered with extreme precision.
Which forces a very provocative speculation. Was this an intentional concealment? An effort by someone in history to sever the ancestral message so later generations wouldn't understand it?
Whether it was intentional obfuscation or just natural degradation, the researchers in the sources managed to execute a massive breakthrough here.
Yeah, walk us through that. How did they figure it out?
To decode Maga, they realized they had to abandon modern Javanese entirely. The true understanding was only unlocked when tracing its etymology and phonology back across the ocean to ancient Vedic Sanskrit.
How does an ancient Sanskrit word end up hidden in a Javanese alphabet?
You have to look at the historical trade winds and the heavy Indianization of Southeast Asia during the ancient eras. Sanskrit vocabulary flooded into the Austronesian languages.
Okay, that makes sense.
When the researchers analyzed ancient Vedic texts, they found a supreme title often attributed to major deities, specifically Indra. The title is Sri Magavan.
Sri Magavan. What is the exact translation of that title?
It denotes the highest, most absolute form of the divine. It translates to the noble giver, the supreme bestower, the divine entity who possesses all wealth and gives the ultimate gift.
That is a massive conceptual leap from a meaningless filler word. But explain the mechanics of the linguistic shift. How does a complex word like Magavan shrink down into Maga?
It happens through a predictable process called linguistic drift, specifically phonetic erosion.
Like how English words lose letters over time.
Exactly. The Austronesian phonetic environment, the natural way people in ancient Java moved their mouth, did not easily accommodate heavy, aspirated consonant clusters like the E in Magavan. It felt unnatural.
So they just sort of sanded it down.
Right. Over hundreds of years of oral transmission, the heavy E softened into a hard G. The end of the word was clipped for efficiency, and Magavan, naturally and predictably, eroded into Maga.
So, hiding in plain sight, disguised by centuries of linguistic erosion, the word Maga doesn't mean nothing.
Yes, but that only solves half the puzzle. We still have to decode the final word of the alphabet, Bathanga.
Let me jump in here because I checked the dictionary meanings for this. In Javanese, Bathanga means a corpse, a dead body, or maya in Indonesian, which fits the tragic myth of the two dead guards.
But the island of Java isn't a linguistic monolith.
Exactly. If you look at the Sundanese language, which evolved right next door on the exact same island, the root meaning shifts significantly. In Sundanese, it translates to meat scraps or flesh, specifically tetelan daging.
It moves the definition away from just a dead body and reframes it as physical, mortal substance, the meat of incarnation.
When you synthesize both of those massive linguistic breakthroughs, the standard translation of the final line completely shatters.
Magabatanega does absolutely not mean, and then they both became corpses.
What does the decoded line actually say, then?
It translates to the noble divine bestower who gives his flesh.
The noble divine bestower who gives his flesh. I mean, I was just blown away when I read that, because you are no longer reading a localized myth about stubborn messengers. You are reading a perfectly articulated summary of one of the most profound, complex theological mysteries of the Christian faith.
It is describing the concept of kenosis.
Explain the philosophical scandal of that for the ancient mind.
Well, the ancient world viewed divinity as synonymous with absolute power, immunity from suffering, and distance from the dirt of human existence. The concept of kenosis upends that entirely.
It's a Greek term, right?
Yes, from the New Testament. It is the assertion that the omnipotent creator voluntarily stripped away the privileges and immunities of divinity and willingly took on the frail, vulnerable, mortal reality of human flesh.
The supreme being chose to become meat, to bleed, to suffer, to be broken.
To become Bathanga.
Oh, yes. The high and holy, the Maga, voluntarily lowering itself to become earthly material.
And when you take this revelation of Maga Bathanga and apply it backwards to the rest of the alphabet, the entire narrative transforms. Let's look at the first line again. Ha-nakaraka.
Karaka translates to messenger or emissary.
So in this decoded theological framework, Jesus is the ultimate karaka. He is the ultimate messenger sent from the divine.
He is the messenger who enters into the datasawala, the eternal gridlock dispute and hostility between a perfect heaven and a broken humanity.
And he resolves that dispute not through combat, but by coming down to bestow his Bathanga, his flesh, as the ultimate sacrifice to resolve the ultimate sin.
The ha-daat is a prophecy of kenosis, and what elevates this from just a cool linguistic puzzle is how the sources connect this Javanese script back to the physical Siri Penang ritual we discussed earlier.
They aren't just two separate phenomena. They're two halves of a complete cosmic cycle.
It's so exciting to map it out. In the Siri Penang ritual, you start at the bottom. You take earthly, mundane materials, a leaf, some dirt-colored nut, and bone-white lime. You chew them, and they are elevated.
Transubstantiated into something sacred, a blood covenant. The trajectory is upward, humanity attempting to reach up and manufacture a sacred covering.
But the ha-daat code, specifically the Maga Bathanga, operates in the exact opposite direction. You start at the very top, with the supreme divine bestower. And instead of things being elevated, the sacred and high voluntarily comes down.
It lowers itself, emptying out its sacred privileges to become the earthly, mundane material, to become the flesh.
The downward motion perfectly answering the upward motion, they are two halves of a complete theological cycle. And this brings us to a concept that is absolutely vital to understanding Nusantara culture.
You cannot decode Southeast Asian history without understanding the concept of ruwat.
Ruwat, or ruwatan. From what I've read, it's about purification, restoring cosmic harmony, and breaking generational curses.
Exactly. Ancient Nusantara cultures understood the human actions create metaphysical pollution. When disaster strikes, it means the harmony between the physical world and the divine order has been ruptured.
And to fix that, they would hold these massive ruwatan ceremonies. You see this in their ancient temples too, the candy.
Right. The sources point out that these massive stone temples weren't just buildings. They were architectural engines built primarily to facilitate ruwatan ceremonies. They were designed to purify the land.
So you have a civilization obsessed with purification, chewing leaves for blood oaths, building temple engines, writing codes into their alphabet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound argument made by our sources is that all of these localized efforts were prophetic placeholders.
Waiting for the ultimate fulfillment.
Yes, the cross of Jesus serves as the ultimate universal ruwat. The crucifixion is the fulfillment of all these hidden Nusantara codes and physical rituals.
It's the final purification that balances the cosmic scales. And the source material makes a really bold anthropological claim to back this up. It attempts to explain why this specific region held onto the code.
It's a theory of a faithful dispersion.
Yeah, the author suggests that the people of Nusantara are the direct descendants of Adam and Noah, who faithfully, if subconsciously, preserved this universal prophecy of Jesus' salvation within their cultural DNA.
While other civilizations may have lost or corrupted the original prophecy, these migrating groups settled in the archipelagos and fiercely protected the core mechanic of salvation.
They locked it into the shape of their letters and the chemistry of the plants they chewed. And because of this overwhelming convergence of evidence, the author of our source material makes a stunning, culminating proclamation.
They dare to give Jesus a brand new, deeply enculturative title.
A title grown organically from the deepest roots of Nusantara culture, because they decided Western title was just insufficient for a culture that had been prophesying his arrival for thousands of years.
They bestow the title, Sii Maha Magavan.
Or, as it would be pronounced with the local Nusantara accent, Magawan, Chirai Maha Magavan, saying Perawat Sijati.
Let's break down why this title is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, deconstruct it for us.
Sri and Maha are ancient prefixes that denote the absolute highest supreme majesty. By combining them with Magavan, you are taking the deepest ancient reverence for the divine and marrying it flawlessly to the theology of the cross.
It honors the highest vernacular of the culture while accurately describing him as the supreme noble bestower who gives his flesh to purify the world.
And Sang Perawat Sejati translates to the true purifier. It validates the culture, saying their ancestors weren't lost in the dark, their alphabet was whispering his name all along.
So what does this all mean? Let me pause here and speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. We want to make it explicitly clear that we are strictly remaining impartial here.
Absolutely.
We are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing a specific religious viewpoint or trying to convert anyone. We are simply reporting on the profound ideas contained in the original source material.
It's about marveling at the human phenomenon.
Exactly. It is just staggering to see how humanity across different continents and eras seems to share the exact same coded longing for a savior.
And that leaves you with a really lingering thought to mull over today.
Yeah, what's our final takeaway here?
If ancient civilizations managed to hide the deepest truths of the universe in a simple leaf chewed by grandmothers or in the curves of everyday calligraphy, What mundane, everyday habits are we practicing today in the modern world that might secretly be holding the philosophical or theological codes of our era?
Oh, wow. I mean, think about our digital habits.
Right. Will people 5,000 years from now decode our digital habits and our emojis to find our deepest spiritual longings hidden entirely in plain sight?
That is a crazy thought. We are always leaving a legacy, even when we have no idea we are doing it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been an incredible journey through history.
It really has. As a special send-off, the poem Sekapur Siri Penang, which sparked this entire incredible analysis, has been transformed into a beautiful audio piece. We invite you to listen to it as the deep dive fades out, allowing the ancient words and concepts to wash over you.
Keep looking for the hidden architecture in your everyday life.
See you on the next deep dive.
Helai daun di tanganmu, bawaku ingat legenda bersirat. Adam Hawa memetik dedaunan, dijadikan mereka penutup aurat. Namun Allah pun lalu gantikan kulit hewan dikena mereka pakaian. Dan di atas daun obat itu kau oles kapur sewarna tulang. kapur pinang perlombang, kau tambah gambir cengkeh tembakau. Ku terima hangat nan syukur dan senang, susah sengketa kini serasa lampau. Yang Tuhan beri telah ku terima, sudilah terima hantaran hamba. Sesirih kapur pinang surgawi, Sri Maha Menghaban sang caraka, Yesus magakan tubuhnya sendiri. Berhanga Yesuslah mana sejati.
Ono soroko Doto sawalo Pado joyoyo Mogo botongo